Are we on? Let's go. Welcome to another episode of the OoruLabs podcast from Bengaluru. Ever complain how bad our cities are, how bad your commute is? You'll get to hear from people who are working to solve these problems in their own way. This is your weekly soapbox for urban sustainability. I am your host Satya Sankaran. Deepak Sriram Krishnan is an associate director for WRI India's energy program and leads work on clean energy initiatives, which is renewable energy and energy efficiency, for different consumer categories, clean energy transitions, and the water energy nexus. Prior to this, he's worked with the energy consulting practices of PricewaterhouseCoopers and Deloitte. He's a certified energy risk professional. He's an electrical engineering graduate and holds a master's degree in electric power systems. Welcome to the show, Deepak.
Thank you, Satya. Thanks for having me.
So here's a headline from Money Control that kind of summarizes what we want to talk about today. It was just recently, I think it was last week in the papers, like Karnataka industries fume over frequent power cuts and seek proper power supply from the state. And of course, the standard excuse from the energy department was attributed to the power crisis due to a high demand and deficient monsoon rainfall and things like that. So it begs the question, Deepak, are our cities going to plunge into darkness anytime soon, considering the way this is going?
Very interesting question. And these MSMEs being upset is not just a phenomenon in Karnataka. Over here, the most recent headline has been the power cuts that they are facing and challenges regarding their production. Whereas if you see in Tamil Nadu, for instance, they have been complaining against the huge tariff hike that they had. They struck work for a whole day. So the problem is actually very complex. And, as a lot of us in the energy sector say, the sector energy is a wicked problem, because if you try to solve for something, it actually affects something else. So it needs that complete system level kind of thinking. But, to directly address the question that you have asked, no, I don't think we'll plunge into darkness that way, the way, we could have, if things hadn't, been planned, or, maybe 10, 15 years ago, when the demand deficit and the electricity supply deficit used to be in the double-digit percentage numbers. Whereas more recently, there was a short period when there was a so-called surplus. But even now, if you actually take the numbers that we are meeting at the national level or at a southern region level or even at a state level, there is a sort of single digit percentage deficit. So, for example, if you take FY 22-23 figures for demand at an all India level against 215 lakh 888,000 megawatts, we met 207 lakhs 231 megawatts of peak demand we met. Whereas in the whole year, against 1,500,000, approximately that requirement of million units, that is million kilowatt hours of electricity, we only had a deficit of 0.5% of those electricity units couldn't be supplied. So what this means is, in certain time periods, either very high temperatures when ACs are running at full blast, and if it also so happens that power plants are also taken out for servicing or have had a breakdown, then they aren't able to meet that demand requirement. That means all the capacity that is available is not coming online. But overall, in a year, the amount of electricity that is being generated fell short only by 0.5%. Now, this is a constant, race for catch up between demand and supply. You never know when a new commercial property is going to come up, new industry is going to come up. The generating plants also have a gestation period. The lines that connect the plant to the grid need to be also planned. So I would say that there, and we are also living in a time of climate change where we don't know what the next day's temperature is going to be vis-a-vis today or even yesterday. So in such a scenario, it's likely that we'll have these short-term interruptions, but I don't think we'll get into a significant crisis mode on a regular day-to-day basis.
So this also begs the question: the sources that we are relying on. If you're attributing to deficient monsoon rainfall, we already have the agriculture depending on the monsoon rainfall. You can't have just the power supply also depending on the monsoon rainfall. How are we doing in terms of what kind of sources we are diversified? We know thermal is there. We've been fighting with coal, and now with the climate change thing, we have to de-risk from that as well. With the thermal energy going down, are we going to continually rely on hydroelectricity? What is the state of other sources? There are renewable sources. What's going on there? And is nuclear an option? Let's talk a little bit about the sources. What can you tell us about? How are
Sure.
we diversifying there?
So at an all India level, if you see September numbers, thermal was around 239 gigawatts of installed capacity, out of which coal itself was 213. Gas was about 25. Nuclear is about 7.5 gigawatt. Hydro is 47, and renewables, which is wind, solar, and biomass, was about 132 gigawatts. So in percentage terms, if you exclude hydro, again there is difference about whether hydro should be considered as renewable or not. For argument's sake, if we take hydro out of the renewable definition, 31% of the installed capacity in India was renewables. But what is more critical is that this 31% is only contributing 10 to 12% of the overall electricity generated in the country. So which means, because sun only shines morning to say
Okay.
afternoon, wind is there only in certain seasons. So these sources, without the backing of batteries, we are not able to increase the share of these renewables significantly into the grid. So the focus now, because everyone knows that putting up these plants is the easy part, ensuring
Mhm.
that they work in a coordinated manner in the grid. And we also map the demand across regions. Let's say somewhere in the north on a particular day they have high solar generation, but somehow their demand happens to be low. Easy transfer of power to the southern grid, so that states or an industry down here can use it. That level of coordination is what needs to improve, and also bringing in new technologies like storage. I think that's where we'll see that electricity percentage number from renewables increase.
So that's like 31% you said, but only 13% of it is usable at any given point in time. That's what you were saying on renewables, right?
Yeah, so
So,
13% of, let's say, the electricity that they generate, if you take it to the larger basket, so what 239 gigawatts of thermal energy, the amount of electricity that they generate versus 132 gigawatts of renewables and the electricity that you generate, that renewable electricity forms only 10 to 12% of the whole basket of the electricity that is generated. Whereas if you just take how much is installed, the machinery that is set up, that comes to 31%.
that's the other thing, right? So the thing that I had plucked out of the internet was India's solar energy generation capacity from. I think this was one of the blogs that you had written quite a while ago, 2017, I guess.
Okay.
In 2014 was 5.8 gigawatts to 100
Hmm.
gigawatts by 2022, but we seem to have as a basket of renewables, including wind and others. Do you think is solar going to be a driver, or are we seeing the split nicely between solar, wind, and whatever else is there, removing hydro
Okay.
out?
Okay. So initially, wind was the leader. The history for wind generation also starts with the textile mills in and around Coimbatore and other areas, and after being fed up of repeated interruptions from the grid electricity, they started entering into power purchase agreements with wind farms, and the government also started giving tax breaks for people to set up a lot of windmills in and around the Kanyakumari, Palakkad pass area. So you even now, if you go there, that is still
Yeah.
the major wind hub for India. So wind actually had a significant head start. The solar story actually starts in 2010, 2011 with what was called the Jawaharlal Nehru National Solar Mission, which is when the government of India started calling for auctions for developers to come and set up projects, sell it to a central buyer who would then resell it to states, and various innovative mechanisms were brought in to try and pool high cost solar with relatively lower cost coal electricity, and provide a bundled a source of electricity to the distribution companies. Now, over time, costs of solar have also fallen, and really aggressive biddings. We have had costs of sub 2 rupee bids also that have come in. But whether these projects have actually come online or not is still a debatable question. But roughly, we can say that if you have a very large solar plant and you provide a guaranteed offtake and all, you can expect a cost of 2.5, 3 rupees kind of picture. So that meant lots of states started bringing solar into their energy mix. So wind. So instead of the interesting part was, instead of solar, cannibalizing the source, coal, it started cannibalizing wind. So that meant there was a little bit of slowdown in the wind space. And there was also an experiment with what is called a reverse competitive bidding by the government, saying, I'll fix a ceiling. You guys fight amongst yourself to see who will offer the lowest tariff. So, which meant there were some unrealistic risk projections made, and tariffs bid out, and those projects also didn't see the end of day. So now they have gone back to the earlier, competitive bidding, where you estimate your cost that you need, factor in the risks that you will need, and give me a cost of power that at which you will supply electricity to me. So since then, things have picked up a bit. Now, large scale solar, large scale wind have also more recently started hitting the similar infrastructure problem in terms of land requirement, and there have been a couple of instances of where large solar plants have come into direct conflict with communities who wanted to protect their sacred groves. There was also the case of transmission lines coming out from solar plants, coming in the path of the Great Indian Bustard in its migratory route. So challenges like that are also there. But definitely, solar and wind still will continue to play a significant role in the renewable energy story. The only additions would be that in solar, in apart from this large ground-mounted solar plants which we are seeing, the rooftop solar story has not been very successful. Initially, even when the present Prime Minister announced a 100 gigawatt solar target, the original split was 60 gigawatts to come from this utility scale ground mounted solar. 40 was to come from rooftop. But that rooftop number even today is, I think, 8, or it might have just touched 10. So that is a significantly untapped story. And in wind, I think now with the maturation of technology and seeing the success of other countries, offshore wind is also an option that is being looked at. Right now, there are blocks that are going to be allocated off the coast of Tamil Nadu and Gujarat, and both put together, if things go as per plan, we should have 30,000 megawatts of offshore wind come online by 2030. But overall, around 72,000 megawatts of both the state coasts has been estimated. So definitely, the renewable story will center around solar and wind, but not just the land-based ones. We'll also see a roof as well as going out into the oceans. So those will also play a role.
So I want to come back to the roof and at a later point in time and figure out how we go forward there and why it is so abysmal and what can be done to do the uptake. But we'll touch upon coal now and see it still plays a significant role. It's more assured and you can burn it when you want. But this is not aiding our nationally defined contributions in how we want to go and we want to reduce. But unless the others pick up the slack, we are going to always keep catching up because the energy intensity is only going to increase. If our economy is going to grow, the energy intensity is going to increase, and there will always be pressure for renewables to catch up. So what are the because coal is very high, right? Even if you look at solar and other things, we can at least look at part of it being fulfilled at the rooftop level and try to see how we can be self-sufficient, just like how we are trying to do with water. But coal is going to be there for a while.
Right.
What are the other things that are going to pick up the slack? Is there any effort on nuclear or gas? Is there any pressure on gas? Is there going to be increases? Are there any other kind of fuel source that can get us this kind of energy?
So the other challenge with coal is that you rightly mentioned that unless renewables pick up the speed, coal will play a role. But it is also the elements of societal impacts also which are there as far as coal is concerned. So if you take a state like Jharkhand or Chhattisgarh, a vast majority of districts are dependent on jobs that center around mining of coal. Whether it is a Coal India mine associated township, or if it is a power plant, its townships, transportation jobs. Lots of those economic linkages are also there. And in fact, if we actually do a rapid renewable energy transition without factoring in those impacts, it will actually be backbreaking for those states. So that is why you also don't see that rapid phase out, because genuinely those states are very rightly concerned about what will happen to people within their jurisdiction. So that is also another element that is playing out. Other sources per se, nuclear is what one would look at as a, I won't say like to like, but typically coal has been seen as a base load maintaining resource, saying I'll steadily feed in coal into the boiler, and it can meet a base load, and anything that comes up over say a period of 1 or 2 hours, gas plants which can ramp up and ramp down rapidly would take up that slack. So nuclear also plays a similar role. It's quite steady in its operation. So ideally one would say that if not coal, then nuclear can fit in and come along. But development of these plants has also been a challenge. Again, multiple reasons, acquisition of land, convincing people that it is safe. How much of a safety factor can you build in? Because any disaster is a 1 in 1,000, 1 in 1,000,000 kind of thing. So really convincing people that this is going to be safe. Waste disposal is an issue. Plus, on the contractual side, even though we have the nuclear deal in place, suppliers want that indemnity, which government doesn't want to give. So those challenges have prevented nuclear from scaling up rapidly. Gas was another hopeful story. Again, in 2010 to 2013, with the Reliance D6 in the Krishna Godavari discovery, a lot of gas assets were built on the promise that there would be this large gas supply, but somehow that didn't work out, and a lot of those plants are actually mothballed and operating at very low plant load factors. Imports from Qatar and Australia are an option, but those costs are significantly high. So gas currently sits in as a ramp up and ramp down situation where with so much of renewables coming in, if there is a sudden cloud cover, or if there is a regular transition over an evening, and if there is no wind in that particular time of the night, how can gas come in? So that's the role that gas is also filling in. So it is quite difficult to see what else beyond coal we can look at, so as to say that we don't need coal. So that is also one of the problems which is impeding the transitioning away from coal completely.
So what is the projection in total requirement from now till, let's say, we want to become the $5 trillion economy or whatever? It's not going to stop at 5. But if you project in 5 years and 10 years down the line, at least for now, it takes that long to get all these things. We are at what now? 239, you said?
So 239, 239 gigawatts thermal installed capacity.
Thermal only, but in total, what is the
Total
current
will be
installed
about
capacity? Will be it
400.
adds up to 400 plus.
Yeah, 400 plus. Yes.
Right.
So,
and if it double this or triple this is what it might be. It may not be
definitely
perfectly elastic, but at some level it's at least double this, right?
Correct.
So if you go from 400 to 800 or 1,000 or a 1 terawatt capacity, considering coal may not grow as much, which one is the most likely to pick up the slack?
Okay.
Will coal go from, let's say, 230 to 400 in this and stay at less than that? Where do you think the rest of it, what is the ideal split on the source side you think will?
The Central Electricity Authority has brought out a national electricity plan looking at what are the projections for 2030. The number that we definitely know is that as per our NDC targets, 500 gigawatts has to be coming from renewables. Now, which means that let's say if we grow to 1,000, 1,200, coal will still be at at least 400, 450. I can definitely dig out those numbers, and maybe we can add that
Fair
on
enough.
later. Still, coal is expected to play a significant role. The challenge here is whether it is going to be new plants that we are going to add, or there is an existing pipeline. In fact, as we speak, there is a pipeline of projects which have either just been announced or they have got stuck up for various reasons. So the hope is that we won't need to build anything more than what is currently in the pipeline, and therefore we can make do with that. And then by 2032 or so, hope is that post that, battery storage would also become quite economical, and we can start to rely more and more on renewables, and slowly phase down, and at the end phase out coal. So I think that's the trajectory that is projected.
So while the coal will double, you're looking at renewables to pick up 3 times, right? So we're from
Yes.
500, we're at 132. That's another 370 almost needs to be there, which is 3 times what we have now. That's quite a tall ask. So let's come and dig into how that can happen. Before that, I want to get to the grid now, right? I mean,
Right.
we have the source. There are these distribution companies which are in the middle. There are power procurement companies like Karnataka Power Transmission Corporation. Then there's a Karnataka Power Corporation. So many PPS in between all these things.
Right.
The grid is predominantly owned by the state discoms. But in some places, they are also privatized, right? What's the scenario? How is Tata Power operating?
Okay.
They replace the distribution company, or are they working under a contract and still have to pay the distribution company? How does that work, and what are like the losses there, and how are they doing?
The power sector, as it was structured or is in a large part, comprises of your traditional linear flow. There is a generating company, and these are either comprised of centrally owned things like your NTPC, your National Hydropower Corporation, Nuclear Power Corporation. So these would be what we call central generating stations. Then each state has its own power generation company. Like Karnataka, for instance, has Karnataka Power Corporation. So they build their own power assets like Raichur, Sharavati, all those belong to them. And then and then power sector in India is effectively de-licensed as per the Electricity Act of 2003. So private sector can come in, and you need to obtain technical and commercial clearances, but you don't need to have a license to operate. Whereas in transmission and distribution, you need to have a license which is granted to you by the regulatory commission. Transmission, for a large part, is also state-owned. So again, at the central level, you have Power Grid Corporation of India Limited, who builds a lot of these transmission lines from those central generating stations, and feeds them into state transmission asset networks. They also build lines interconnecting different states. Then each state again has its own transmission utility. And in the mix, from after 2003, again, the Electricity Act allowed for privatization of some of the transmission lines. So, except for strategically important technology, if they feel that the private sector still doesn't have that capacity to absorb that technology skill sets, those are handled by central government utilities exclusively. But otherwise, if there is an empowered committee which takes stock of the transmission infrastructure requirements, and of late we have also seen a lot of transmission corridors and substations being bid out to the private sector. So you have lots of folks like Reliance, Sterlite. These guys have bid and won and are still operating a lot of projects. So that is other part of the transmission grid. Then comes the distribution side, where there is no central sector involvement. So this is where the central because there is the intersection of central and state. Electricity is a concurrent subject as per constitution. So you have distribution companies which are state owned, which are private, and again this lot of the privatization has come up because of historical reasons. So Bombay, for instance, has had BSES, which is now owned by Adani. There is Tata Power, and there is the BEST, but they operate only within the city limits. The rest of Maharashtra is supplied by Maharashtra State Electricity Distribution Company. Similarly, Calcutta has a private utility. Ahmedabad and Surat have a private utility. Jamshedpur has a small area where Tata Power or Justco, that is the utility which is there. So there are pockets of these private utilities, but largely distribution is government owned. There is marked difference in the performance of these utilities. So in the privatized Tata, in whether in Bombay or in Delhi, you'll find that losses are much lower than what is there in other government-owned utilities. Reliability levels are higher, and keeping this in mind, there have also been attempts to introduce what is called as distribution franchisees in pockets of areas which are operated by government-owned distribution companies. So in Maharashtra, they had a distribution franchisee in the Bhiwandi area, which was won by Torrent Power. And then many, say, Agra, Kanpur, they have also seen pockets of distribution franchisees where private sector people come in and they enter into an agreement with the local distribution licensee, and they operate the system, collect the bills, and pay a certain fixed amount to the utility. So this has also evolved in over time, but predominantly distribution is still owned by government utilities.
So recently I met a businessman from Kolkata who said he has a factory where one half of his factory on this side of the road is served by his CESC, which is private, and he always gets power. And
Right.
just on the other side, he has the other part of his factory which is owned by the West Bengal ESC, and he hardly has any power. That market is the difference, and I've heard this from many of my colleagues who I've been working with as well, to see that why isn't this model being followed elsewhere? Why are the discounts in many other states are stuck on trying to do this themselves and not following these things? And also, let's talk about what are the drawbacks of such a thing. Right now, if the Bescom in Bengaluru suddenly it doesn't have power, it's probably giving that off to the farmer, or it's being sucked somewhere else and they are not able to procure it reliably enough. If the private guys can procure it and deliver it, why aren't the other discoms able to do it? And what are the compulsions there that they are facing? Is it just a ideological issue? Is it because you clearly know efficiencies are there? What are they squatting on?
The political economy in electricity is significantly high. The fact that we have also seen it recently in Karnataka with the grant of subsidies. Of course, there are sections of the population which does need that support, but there always has been the debate on whether the subsidy burden has to fall on the company and then they get reimbursed by the government, or they charge rates and the government directly provides a subsidy to the consumer. So that debate has been there, but privatization has like any other new thing has been opposed by existing vested interests in the space who are genuinely worried about their employment opportunities. But historically what we have seen is that say for example in Delhi, it's a 51-49 joint venture between one of the utilities. There are three utilities in Delhi. So Tata Power owns 51% of one of the utilities, and 49% is owned by the Delhi government. So effectively, it's the same set of employees who are working there. It's just that the incentives to chase for that bill which is not paid, to ensure that the asset is functioning properly. They are serving all kinds of consumers, ensuring that they don't lose out on let's say an industry to another area because of poor service. Those KPIs are well defined and very stringently followed up and imposed in the private sector. So overall, yes, it has been definitely the benefits are there, but the disadvantage as I see it is that how do you attract a private sector to look beyond a city? For example, Bescom doesn't just serve the Bangalore city; it also looks at neighboring districts like Dodballapur, Kolar. Also, I think is served by Bescom, and so there is also a significant amount of agricultural load which is also being served. So, whereas as a private sector, I would want to look at an area where I can go in, have control over the entire thing, meter every single consumer, know what my operating costs are. Will they be incentivized to also take on these consumers in non tier 1 or tier 2 cities and towns, would they, for example, even bother to put in the same amount of effort? That is one question which has definitely come up, and these debates have continued. For example, even recent privatization efforts in Chandigarh, Pondicherry, Daman and Diu, which are union territories. So effectively, that should have been logically the easiest place for privatization to be done. They also face significant legal challenges from employee associations mainly. But I think Daman and Diu or Dadra Nagar Haveli, I'm forgetting which one. There, I think the court has agreed for the privatization process to go ahead. But what I would expect is that even a private sector player coming in will definitely need the services of the employees working in that space. They will not en masse terminate a lot of folks because they need those skills. They need knowledge of people working in that space. It's just that the efficiencies and follow up and imposition of these stringent KPIs would be stronger. So I would definitely say that more states could look at it, design it in such a way in consultation with the trade unions and other political folks, so that no one feels that it is deliberately being designed with a intent to keep someone out of a job. So I think that those are some mechanisms which could be considered while designing the privatization process.
Fair enough. I think it could be a mix. Is that the some of the ESCOMs continue to run where the subsidy is required and where support is required from the government side to be able to do. But if you look at cities where the propensity to pay is there, why am I getting a 2,000 rupee benefit on the electricity bill? Right? I mean, if this farmer is getting it, or an identified farmer who's not wasting it is getting it, the discipline in billing and making sure that it is reaching the deserved is definitely worthy of a government effort. But should the cities also have to, if they're willing to pay for better power, let them pay it and get the service that is required. In all of these things, it is, if I'm able to pay for it, I can get better service. I should be allowed to get better service, and those who can't should be taken care of. I think it is a government's job to say there has to be equity, but that doesn't mean that some people have to suffer for the sake of others. Absolutely. It may also mean that the private people need to procure power at whatever rates they are. But coming back to looking at the I don't want to call it the monopoly of the grid, but the grid definitely imposes certain large capital requirements and many other people. This also comes back to the consumption you said at the micro level. Increasingly, I just was in Delhi the other day. Somebody was saying each building should be also a source of power. And it's already built form. It is sucking up the water, it is sucking up the power, it's not generating anything back. So if you look at a circularity in all of these things, what are the kind of rules and laws around, I'm not saying rooftop solar, but building as an energy source? How are you looking at it? How has the government looked at it? What are the different steps in that direction?
So buildings are definitely a huge I will call them stakeholders even though they are a non-living entity, but they are a huge stakeholder in the energy space. One is they come in with an embodied amount of energy into the material that goes into making a building, and then you also have your appliances during the life cycle of a building. So significant amount of energy consumption that happens across the life cycle of the building. So initial efforts have been there. For example, the green building ratings offered by different agencies trying to look at water consumption, energy consumption, and all. But ultimately, what it has come down to is a new energy conservation building code. And there are these codes which are there for commercial and industrial setups, as well as for the residential buildings. There is something called Eco Nivas Samhita. So what these rules in their most recent form have started prescribing is, of course, energy performance index numbers, their compliance to certain codes. But interestingly, they've also started looking at other components related to the energy ecosystem. For example, they're talking about these buildings, new ones at least, coming in with inbuilt facilities for electric vehicle charging. they're also talking about if the building is of a certain size, it necessarily needs to have some amount of rooftop solar inbuilt within it. Now, whether it is rooftop solar or whether we have seen other technology new in news, as you would have found the building envelope itself functioning as a solar generator. In addition, you also have in some spaces, for instance, biomass may be an option. In some cases, small wind turbines placed on the roof strategically may also be an option. Right now, as you rightly said, the focus has been on rooftop solar, but looking at location, building typology, specific, and in the nearby ecosystem, if there are energy sources, I think definitely we can think of these additional sources also coming in to power the building operations. And of course, being in India, cooling is going to be a significant a requirement for all of the buildings. And how do we make sure that, is it going to be the same air conditioned model, or are we going to look at some form of heat pumps or energy efficient district cooling? So those are options which are also being looked at, and hopefully we'll start seeing pilots and full scale implementation within all these buildings going forward.
So I have heard of building integrated solar and panels that are coming in, but increasingly there isn't a penalty for designing a really horrible building with glass fronts in a very hot place. And there doesn't seem to be any knowledge of enforcement in saying, why aren't you putting any windows on this thing, right? And why isn't there cross ventilation in your building to reduce the cooling? There are ratings, like you said, but after the procurement, how many audits happen on all
Correct.
of these
Correct.
things? How do we continue to ensure that what you stated when you built is what it is till today, right? There are some of those audit requirements. Do you think any capacity needs to be built in re-evaluating all of these buildings to say you're actually building shoddy buildings, you're becoming a net consumer and not even trying to preserve or generate? Just like you're not trying to do water management, right? You're
Correct.
not going to get water if you're not going to get water management done and
Correct.
prove it to me.
Correct.
It's completely captured. People can just pay their way out of all of these things. There
Correct.
isn't any building code which says that you need to continue to do this. There's going to be cut. I file GST every month. Why isn't there an audit every 6 months saying, did you destroy any of your characteristics that you stated when you
Mm-hmm.
built? Do you see any of that capacity lacking? Do you think it is possible that as a solution, try to at least reduce the intensity?
This is a very valid criticism, and it was as if these ratings were awarded on paper and used to enhance the sale value of the
Hmm.
project. But then, as you rightly said, performance audits were never happening. So the thinking now is changing in terms of whether we should actually be prescribing these codes,
Hmm.
follow it to the letter, and then the question of whether there is enough capacity to monitor all these huge number of buildings that are going to come up and certify each one of them. Instead, the thinking is around let's change the parameter for measuring all this.
Hmm.
Instead of saying you need to do 100 steps, I'll give you an energy, what is called an energy performance index,
Hmm.
saying that for this climatic region, this is the ideal amount of energy that a building should consume. You design it in whatever way you want, but
Correct.
the meter that I install, and I check it every month. And if you have these more advanced meters, you can even check it real time. At every
Yeah.
point of time, your consumption should be, either less than that or even negative. So if you're generating extra through your own sources and helping the grid out and helping the rest of the system out, even better. So the designing the incentives to see that they always are below that energy performance index. I think instead of right now there is a property tax rebate given for following things on paper, and that is lasting into perpetuity. Whereas these energy performance index, which means that if at any point of time I have a recorded reading showing you have violated the standard I have given, I can easily also with proof provide the penalty. So that thinking is evolving within the Bureau of Energy Efficiency and other associated bodies. So hopefully we'll see that come instead of a voluminous code that needs to be followed. And the advantage of this is also that traditionally designed buildings which don't follow your concrete structure, the codes sometimes don't are not able to factor those things. So if it is just an energy performance index number, then it also becomes easier to get those buildings also monitored.
No, that's a wonderful point, right? The government, I don't think, understands outcome-based measurement rather than saying how many windows, how many doors, how much of
That is changing.
setback.
That is
It is.
changing.
So tell me
Yeah,
where it is changing. How are they able to monitor this with smart meters and all those things? You should be able to upload your
yes,
data live back
correct,
as a compliance. Why should we even be going and inspecting how many windows you have?
correct.
Net, like you said, net, are you generating? Are you within the limits? How are they doing that?
So again, I don't have a concrete example of where it has succeeded so far. There are, say, for example, some net zero buildings which have been, isolated examples that have been built and designed for specific consumers. But overall, at a large, urban business center, or a large government housing project, or government office buildings itself, there I think that is where the Bureau of Energy Efficiency is trying to push uh, uh, the thinking towards implementation. So they'll need to now work with the municipalities, they'll need to work with the housing and urban development ministries to ensure that these numbers, say for example this performance index, the need to meet that performance index falls into their procurement guidelines, when they procure equipment, award the contract. All this number stays sacrosanct, and alongside they also need to put in the necessary infrastructure for measurement. And as you rightly said, there smart meters have picked up in the electricity space. I'm sure that those meters, again with a slight tweaking, can also be used to integrate readings related to water usage, or if some building is also using gas, that integrated reading can also come up and come into that consolidated number that the bureau can specify.
Sure. So even if I did have a glass front, it was building integrated solar and it was actually generating net positive, I should be let off the hook instead of saying you can't have glass anymore.
Right,
But that
right.
brings me to the other question of why is rooftop solar still
Mhm.
at such a pathetic rate? What do you think are the factors inhibiting? What are the Is it a capex issue? Are there fears? What is it that is preventing people from
So
doing it?
at the beginning, awareness is one of the major issues. So we found in some of our door-to-door surveys that people didn't even know that there was a rooftop scheme being offered by that local discom. And we ran this survey in, I think, Bangalore, Chennai, Jaipur, Chandigarh, and one more place. Awareness was a major issue, and surprisingly, the significant dependence on having the discoms app or a fancy website where it's very difficult to look through the clutter and go to that specific thing, that was actually proving to be a hindrance. People many of the people we surveyed actually wanted newspaper advertisements, felt that newspaper advertisements would have been a better way of reaching out to them about the scheme benefits. So that was one part. The second was lack of awareness on how to evaluate these project economics as it meets their requirements. So they would have different vendors coming in and explaining. Somebody saying, you also need to consider the cost of grid electricity that you avoid purchasing into your calculation. Someone talking only about how much you export and earn from that. So those calculations were also confusing. And if they entered into an arrangement and then they found that their payback period was not meeting the requirement, they felt that it was a waste of investment, and that word of mouth prevented, let's say, some of their neighbors from taking up these projects. The third factor, of course, was capex, and of course now the costs have come down, but still some families may find it a little expensive to put up rooftop solar and the associated infrastructure of chasing the discoms to get approvals was another major
Hmm.
pain point. They would have an inspector come in, verify your asset, so that once that gets stuck in the queue, you would have paid your vendor, and they would have finished the job, but when do you get approval to connect? So that has also been a major challenge in the offtake of rooftop solar. Last one I would say is the tariff that the regulator used to fix for these rooftop solar systems, and they also impose some capacity limits, saying you can only have rooftop solar up to 70% of your connected load, which meant that I would never be able to export to the grid. Whatever I use, it's only going to offset some of my consumption. So the economics wasn't working out, and in any case, residential consumers pay much lesser than commercial and industrial consumers. So adoption at the C&I end was significantly more. The residential market wasn't seeing that much of offtake. So that's when the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy started to tweak the scheme. They introduced a incentive for the discoms, saying that up to a certain level of capacity, we are going to provide you with an incentive for every kilowatt of rooftop solar you promote in your license area. So that saw some pickup with the discoms starting to push up till they got that incentive number. But then still the fear remains in the discom and the regulator's mind that, if let's say I'm a 5 kilowatt connected consumer and I put up a 20 kilowatt rooftop solar, I would not only would I, not consume any electricity from the grid, but I would also continuously export, and that would mean loss of revenue for them. So that is the biggest fear that is there in the discoms mind, that if I allow people to install more rooftop solar than that is their own connected load, there would soon be this glut where I wouldn't be able to make any revenue out of sale of electricity to these folks. So, but because the model has been linear, the generation, transmission, distribution, sale, the thinking around also looking at me as not just a consumer but also someone who can supply to you, so that I can so that I as a discom can offset any costly power purchase that I am doing from some distant generator. That thought process and a systemic thinking, I feel, definitely needs to come.
But if discom is useful for that distant generator, and that's where your capacities lie, and if the customers are anyway the retail, or rather the consumer, the residential consumer is not paying as much because of everything, because of the politics around it, why do we even have to sell to the discom? Why aren't they letting us off the hook and say, you fend for yourself? Why do you have to produce only 70%? You want to make 200%, do it, and then sell it wherever you can. If you create that marketplace, this is why I said monopoly of the grid. Why should the discoms, when there is so much to be caught up on, and you're looking at 1 terawatt and there's so much to do, why are they trying to squat on the residential and not allowing innovation there? Because now that even if it's getting subsidies from discoms is like pulling teeth. And the other thing is, if you feed it and if let's say the power line goes out, I can't even feed it back to the grid. It's gone. That's a loss, and it increases the time for my recovery of investment as well. Why can't I just store the energy in a battery and find an operator who can say, here it is, take it, go and put it somewhere else? How do you think we can divest ourselves of this tying up with the discom? Discom shouldn't even be interested in us. We aren't even paying that much to them. They should say, just go fend for yourself. I don't want to buy from you. And instead focus on the industries which are crying and say, you guys can pay more, I'll serve you more. Right? That is also a possibility. Where do you see this going? And this battery thing you talked about, you did mention that not all of the renewables that are generated are used up. And you pointed to the fact that there needs to be storage. Where do you see that going? What is going on in the storage space?
I'll take this in 2-3 parts. One is, of course, the need for the discom itself, and whether they can divest themselves for these consumers. That thought process also come into some of the discoms thinking. For example, coming down from the MNRE side, saying that if you have, let's say, 100,000 consumers in your license area who are on an average consuming only 100 units of electricity, and the cost to supply to them is much more. Why don't you, as a discom, facilitate rooftop solar for them so that you can take them off your subsidy needs, reduce the burden on the state government? So that thought has been seeded. So hopefully, just like how now they're thinking of solarizing agricultural consumers, so that you avoid paying subsidy for their consumption. The next logical step would be to look at less consuming residential consumers. So that is still work in progress. Hopefully, we'll see that. But why they aren't letting everyone go is again plain fear that where will I get that revenue from? So what they are also missing out in this picture is if I have rooftop solar and I inject excess electricity into the grid, this is electricity which is directly there at the point of consumption. Somebody else is going to consume it at that same distribution transformer. It doesn't need to pass through layers of transmission lines. So where there is definitely going to be at least 5 to 7% loss, and then when it comes into the distribution grid, the loss levels are higher. So I save on all that loss. So that and the cost, given that prices have fallen, instead of purchasing, in a very hot summer day, instead of procuring from a very expensive short-term trader, or let's say the whole country is facing high temperature and the exchange prices have also shot up, I can actually avoid paying that 12 rupees, 13 rupees price and actually buy from me as at 3 or 4 rupees. But again, that level of real-time market, that structure, in theory, the regulator can start pushing for it and introduce. They can also allow folks like use demand response as a technology, wherein I, as an aggregator, for instance, can go around one area and tell, say, 10 or 15 people that, give me control of your air conditioners. Instead of 24 degrees, can you live at 27 degrees? Which means that my energy consumption would be less, and that savings I'll consolidate and bid into the market. Or, going back to the example of batteries, I become what is a virtual power plant. I go across some 50, 60 rooftops with batteries and tell them that, at certain times of the day, can you give me control of your batteries? I'll, if the grid needs, I'll take some electricity, pump it into the grid. So those innovations are, have been explored in research papers. They have been talked about in discussion forums, but actually putting it into a pilot in a particular area, or allowing it en masse, that needs that market regulations to be brought in. And I'm hopeful that it'll come in slowly, but we need it faster. But it is things are being deliberated. For example, at the exchange level itself, there are green electricity products which are being introduced. So hopefully, regulators at the state level will also start allowing these services to come in, instead of looking at it as a product that is sold. Look at different kinds of services that can come out of electricity and energy.
Because when it comes down from the ministry, I was just reading this today, is that the Ministry of Power releases a comprehensive framework to transform India's energy storage landscape. Projects exceeding 5 megawatts will be mandated to incorporate energy storage system with a minimum of 1 hour. Right? They're also proposing a VGF for these projects. Of course, it's skewed towards the big power producers. When buildings are producing energy in excess and the solar is really good, and I just covered up my entire building with solar and I'm producing a lot, are there any regulatory barriers to selling that power right now? Because I think somewhere there, if there are right incentives provided, if you can give this to a big power producer, why can't we say inside the city at each building level, let there be some economics of serving each other? I produce in my building, I share it with the next guy, right? Yeah. Some kind of a microgrid that we can set up. Is that prevented right now? Are the discoms still cagey about it? Or is the industry solution not there? Where is the block?
So the microgrid solution is there. So technically it is there. You can set it up, have this peer-to-peer trading. And in fact, again, pilots on peer-to-peer trading is there. For example, Uttar Pradesh has allowed some blockchain firm to actually do this peer-to-peer trading among a set of consumers. And in terms of sale of electricity to the grid, it is allowed. For example, there are mechanisms called net metering and gross metering, wherein gross metering means I put up rooftop solar or building integrated PV, whatever I generate, I sell to the grid. Net metering is I offset my consumption and any excess I sell. There is also a tweak in that called a net feed-in, wherein instead of a net metering, where let's say if I usually consume 100, but my solar generates 120, I don't pay anything at all. I in
Correct.
fact earn for the extra 20. So what the discoms were observing there is that, let's say some big bungalow, a consumer who is paying a bill of 5,000, 6,000 for multiple ACs, when they put up rooftop solar, they're actually knocking off the uh, electricity units at the higher bands.
Hmm.
So they found that that was harming them. So then that tweak of net feed-in came in, saying, you generate whatever you can, sell whatever is possible, but your consumption, I'll deem it to have been taken from me. You pay me the rate at which you have to be billed, and for the solar, I'll pay you separately. So that kind of hybrid of that net metering and gross metering arrangement was also brought in. So under these mechanisms, we could continue selling to the grid, but the issue is that whether I generate it at 11 a.m. or whether I generate it at 1 p.m., the price is the same. So what does the grid need at that point of time? Let's say if there is a significant energy shortage event at 2 p.m., and if I am generating extra at that time, even typically like your Uber surge pricing, I should be
Hmm.
paid more.
Hmm.
But right now,
Hmm.
that mechanism is not there. So maybe as a baby step, having that time of day pricing, which right now is there only for consumption at industry level. There is a Ministry of Power ruling which says that from 2025 it has to be compulsory for all consumers. But even that is saying 6 to 10. I will
Hmm.
charge you extra of 10 paise. From some other time, I'll give you a discount of 5 paise. Yes, that's a good start, but with the amount of data that we have, with the amount of data we can get by putting in more smarter meters,
Hmm.
I think we should work out this TOD, link it to what is happening real time in the grid, and suitably incentivize and disincentivize, whatever the case may be, additional generation or reduced consumption. So those mechanisms also need to come into place. And the last point about peer-to-peer trading in a microgrid, again, lots of these private utilities, especially the ones in Delhi, are thinking about it, looking at
Hmm.
residential associations, working with them, and the what they are looking at is, can they be the solar solution provider, and that becomes a separate kind of business
Hmm.
line for them. So again, thinking from a product sale to a service sale. So that seems to be the common thread, which if we follow it up, it might also benefit the discoms because
Yeah.
they still have skin in the game, and it's just a different business line rather than just selling electrons.
That's interesting. So finally, where do you see this the entire systems approach to this thing? We have talked all the way from producers to the consumers, and why rooftop solar or buildings as a generation is not taking off. What are the silver linings you see, and what are the opportunities you see for RWAs, building people who own buildings, the industries? How can they participate in becoming self-sufficient, and how does this going forward? What do you see in the power sector as a whole? Do you see a lot more reform, because it seems that most of the ducks are in play except for some on the this last bit we talked about, is how can people share, and how can you loosen up that strings a little bit and not uh, drive it all the way only to the grid that you already know, but giving them options of saying you don't necessarily have to put it to the grid. So where do you see all these gaps filling up as a final thought, the future, the opportunities, and maybe if there are any gaps in the regulation as well?
Reforms, in a sense, are already sitting in a draft bill.
Hmm.
There, I think 6 months back or a year back, a draft bill was introduced for a debate where it talks about segregation of the ducts and the supply part. So control of the wires, yes, to an extent, I agree that there needs to be a sort of impartial arbitrator, which could be the government, saying that access to these wires should not be restricted to somebody. So that bill has come in. It hasn't been passed because there were other things which became a bone of contention. And but fundamentally, what is being proposed is that there would be a separation of the content and carriage, as they call it,
Very nice.
where carriage would be, say, held by the impartial
Hmm.
operator. Typically, let's say the same discom
Hmm.
separates into wires business, and then there is a bunch of suppliers who would compete for consumers. Now,
Hmm.
how they compete, whether they compete in terms of price, or the quality of service, or whether it is, let's say, one retailer. Like in UK, you have lots of such retailing options. Say there is a company called Octopus Energy which says, I'll give you, let's say, 25% renewables in your bill. Somebody else
Mm-hmm.
saying, you can be a silver category consumer is 50%. Somebody saying you're gold, or even some folks also thinking of 100% RE based supply. So if that
Mm.
goes through, we will at the supply end itself, we are going to see multiple people competing for you know uh, a retail consumers business. So for example, if I'm in Bombay today, I can choose whether I get power from Adani or Tata or BEST. Of course, there is a process to switch the application, and I can even switch back. So that
Mm.
level of retail freedom which is there in, let's say, cell phones and
Mm.
SIMs, telecom, that should hopefully come in. Policymakers and lawmakers actually pass that bill and get it. Of course, there are complaints and concerns about how some of these things could misfire, but unless you get into it, you will not realize how to solve for those problems. So that part is anyway there. Alongside that, I would also want some market regulation at say the retail level. So for example, encouraging these virtual power plants, encouraging demand response as a business, providing them a linkage to what is the retail price to the wholesale price, and there is information flow across these entities, so that encourages me to participate or allow some other aggregator to take control of my ACs, take control of my equipment, and bid on my behalf, share, and whatever earnings they make, give me a share of that. So involving retail consumers as a business, and this could cut across categories. It can be industries, it can be commercial, or even residential. These are some of the uniform solutions that could be looked at. A third area is, in energy storage itself. Right now, we are only looking at it as store the excess renewables, come in at a time of blackout. But these batteries can also actually help me play a role in these markets. So I
Mm.
look at pricing points, take advantage of the arbitrage. So these small scale battery systems can also help play a role. And then there is the linkage to the other sectors as well. For example, electric mobility,
Mm.
whether it is buses or cars, if these vehicles, also have the vehicle to grid option, wherein of course, they consume electricity when they charge, but at a time when they're not in use and the grid needs their services, they can also, at the same charging point, start feeding electricity back into the grid. A sort of modified version of the batteries. So that kind of planning and allowing for those regulatory reforms is also what I would suggest. And then, of course, coming to the buildings, looking at electricity usage, appliances, cooling, all of adopting that integrated approach, having some measurable and monitorable parameters rather than a list of codes is
Mm.
what I would definitely hope to see, at least in an urban setting going.
That's awesome. But I can't let you go without asking this final question. I was always curious. Ministry of Power versus Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, MNRE versus MOP. Why did they get to? What's going on there? Are they ever going to merge?
Okay.
Why this? And it's a ministry. It's not even a department. There are two ministries. What the hell happened there?
So the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, and then also you at the state level you have the state nodal agency. So in
Hmm.
Karnataka it is Credel,
Hmm.
in Tamil Nadu it is TEDA. So these are all established separately at a time when renewables were costly. The
Mhm.
adoption was very low, and therefore you needed these separate entities to push for those products, work with different kinds of communities, handle those subsidies. Whereas Ministry of Power anyway had larger issues like the leaking state electricity boards, reforms over there, and all that. But definitely right now, even Ministry of with the uptake of renewables, MNRE has also grown in importance. I think at least one good feature which I've seen is that at least the minister is common for both. It
Okay.
was there were separate ministers who were there for both of them, but right now it's the same minister for both sets of ministries. So some kind of consolidation is happening, and even rules and regulations that are designed. Let's say MNRE develops a scheme, they make sure that there are Ministry of Power inputs also taken, because ultimately the jurisdiction over sale of that electricity generated from these renewable energy assets comes under the Ministry of Power. Of course, one would, in a very ideal world, wish that there is a single energy ministry which not only covers power, renewable energy, but also looks at the fossil fuels till the time we need them. But yeah, I think that's still some way away. At least, even if we have these different ministries, we have an integrated energy planning approach. At least that is something to be thankful for. We at least are looking at different energy systems coming together, and hopefully going forward we'll find a lot more convergence, and who knows, things institutions could also become merged.
Yep. On that hopeful note, thanks Deepak for coming on the show and demystifying this. I've been a newbie. I didn't know a lot of these things, and it helps to know how our power sector is performing. Blackouts have been a perennial problem, and I just hope that while the saving grace is we don't have that much of a shortfall, and we are not going to go into blackouts and plunge into darkness anytime soon. There are lots of scope for efficiencies and squeezing more energy out of what we already have instead of wasting so much of it on stuff that we are not, and hope for more innovation. Thanks for coming on the show once again, Deepak. And
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
here's a call out to the rest of you to like, comment if you like the show, and subscribe so we can get maybe Deepak back again on one of these issues and more people like him. See you all next week. Bye bye.